Well, thanks for coming today. We'll go ahead and jump right into it. So I'm Zan from the Israel Trade Office in San Francisco. We've got some great partners on the call here today, and let's go ahead and get started right with the agenda slide. And I'll just give you a quick overview of what we'll go through on this call, which is the first call in a series. Should be pretty promising information and potential for help for you all in the process. So here we are. We've got our office, the Economic Mission to the West Coast. I'll have a quick intro of what we do for those of us that haven't worked with us before. We also got our collaborators, so CSSi and Innosphere Ventures. I'll get a quick overview from them and a nice accelerator program that they're actually doing in combination with this webinar series. And then we'll jump right in and have the FDA experts talk about the emergency use authorization process, split between the medical devices and the drug development. So I think very important to also have some time for questions at the end. So along the way, I mean, feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box. Feel free to keep them to the end. But essentially, we should have a solid 20 minutes at the end, really, to work on the questions that you might have, anything about the process, and then let us know if you don't get them answered during the webinar. We'll have our contact information at the end, and feel free to reach out. I think we've got, between us and CSSi and Innosphere, we're I guess ready to deal one-on-one as well and help with any additional questions. So yeah, without further ado, I'll give a quick overview of us if you haven't worked with us, and we'll get off to it. So we are the Israel Economic Mission to the West Coast. As you may guess from this, there's also to the East Coast. We've got an office in New York, also DC, also Houston. So those are across the U.S. It's really four of about 45 trade missions across the world. So it's the Israeli government, it's the Ministry of Economy's effort of, the Foreign Trade Administration to really connect Israeli companies to other potential collaborators across the world. And so our activities really vary. We do, I guess not with COVID times, but we do a lot of in-person events, connect folks for direct meetings, work at conferences, exhibitions, trade shows. And we go across all industry verticals from cybersecurity to automotive, and obviously most importantly healthcare. And so one of the other ways we work, besides for the larger events, is kind of one-on-one assistance to companies. So we'll work with Israeli companies like you all and hop on the phone and really find out what it is that you need to connect, on the West Coast or throughout the U.S. And so that kind of one-on-one work, it's really like temporary, business development, acting as a biz dev arm for you. Really with a focus on connecting to the key ecosystem players that you would need to talk to. So this could be, the VCs after investments. This could be hospitals, insurance payers if you're after pilot programs. And then I think a segue into today is the regulation. It's not all simple for an introduction for money. There's a lot of complex issues at play here. So I'll, in fact, even pass it over to Jim from CSSi to talk about some of the things that they're doing as a part of this program.
Well, thank you, Zan, so very much. And it's a real pleasure to be able to present to you today the Life Science US FDA Accelerator Program. This program was designed to really ensure a seamless and expedited pathway for successful U.S. market entry and commercialization of your drugs and medical devices that are originating in Israel that want to enter the U.S. marketplace. Over the years, we've worked with numerous Israeli-based companies to really help them and to support them with their regulatory and clinical requirements for success, as well as to help them establish a home and to provide them with all of the support necessary for them to be successful in the U.S. marketplace. So working with Zan, we've established a program whereby we're able to provide companies in Israel with various types of regulatory consultation and support, on-demand experts and support to answer your questions with a dedicated helpline. Also, we have a clinical site network of over 1,000 clinical sites that will provide access to at some of the leading academic institutions, including Colorado State. We also will be able to provide access to our network of investors and various strategic partners that we work with to support our clients to ensure that they have the necessary strategic capital to advance their assets forward. And then we'll also be launching, in addition to the educational program, we'll be launching various investor forums throughout the year that we will invite you to participate in through Zan's group. Next slide. This slide simply illustrates a little background on CSSi. We were founded nearly 15 years ago. We're based in Baltimore with offices in San Francisco, Hyderabad, India, and London. We're a full-service CRO offering customized development and commercialization solutions for drugs and medical devices from discovery through commercialization. Our goal at CSSi is to accelerate novel technologies through the FDA by decreasing the risk, the time, and the cost. We've been successful. Our team has commercialized nearly 500 drugs, diagnostics, and devices over the years. And one of the unique benefits of our company is the ability to provide on-demand drug and medical device project teams that are dedicated to your projects in a virtual manner. And we've helped to assist in raising over $700 million in the US for our clients' advancement of their drugs. So with that, I'd like to ask Ben, our strategic partner, to speak next.
Thank you, Jim. So I'm Ben Walker with Innosphere Ventures. I'm the Life Science Executive Director. We are an incubator with offices in Denver, Colorado, Boulder, and Fort Collins. And my office currently, even though it looks like it's the beach, is in Fort Collins. So we have, our platform is three main areas: commercialization, where we help clients work through some of the issues where a lot of startups fail, meaning product market fit, capitalization strategies, customer acquisition strategies, and hiring talent. We also have a venture capital seed fund for investment, and we have facilities here on site with office space and lab space, and also have a relationship with Colorado State University for both office and lab space if that's needed. So over time, we would love to meet with most of you. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Janice Catano from CSSi to talk about FDA and COVID-19 with device development.
Thank you, Ben. It's a pleasure to speak with everyone today. And as Ben said, I'm going to be discussing how the emergency use authorization relates to medical devices. Next slide, please. So to begin, it's important to look at what is the EUA process. What does it mean? So during the COVID pandemic, the FDA has identified products that are in short supply, and the focus of the EUA is to increase access to these products. So during the emergency period, medical products can be sold that have neither been cleared nor approved by the FDA. So if you receive an EUA authorization, you can sell your products as long as there's a declared health emergency. Now, once the health emergency is lifted, you no longer have that regulatory clearance or approval. You can't sell your product. So from CSSi, what we recommend to clients is pursue a parallel pathway. Submit under EUA, and at the same time, start your regulatory submission for a 510K or a PMA pathway, whichever is appropriate for your products. So what is the FDA looking for under EUA? What they've done is, normally you would have to do safety and efficacy. Under EUA, there's a lower efficacy standard that they're going to evaluate the products. So they're looking at a maybe effective criteria, in addition to looking at the overall risk-benefit ratio of your product. So that is not going away. Safety is still there. So the FDA determines the maybe effective criteria, and that level has changed during this pandemic. So initially, when the demand was high and the supply was very low, the efficacy criteria that they allowed for the EUA submissions was very low. what we've been seeing is over time, over these past couple of months, as more products are becoming available with better efficacy, the FDA is actually raising the bar of what is they're considered may be effective. And they've also started rescinding some EUAs for products that had less acceptable efficacy. And we'll go into some of that. So what have they done? The EUA doesn't mean that you can support, that they're going to allow authorizations for just any products. The FDA has identified products that they feel are in short supply that are needed to treat patients under COVID. So initially when it came out in February, the only product on this list was in vitro diagnostic tests. That was it. That was all they were looking for. But the list has really grown steadily. So in March, they added personal protective equipment, basically starting with respirators, masks, and gloves. Over the last about month, gowns and shoe covers were added. Ventilators have been added. And most recently, they've added infusion pumps, respiratory assistance devices, some different wearable products. So the list grows and changes as the situation changes. Next slide, please. Now, from a regulatory perspective, it's been a very dynamic environment. As of right now, more than 40 guidances have been issued. And in the beginning, literally, there were guidances issued almost daily and guidances that were being revised very, very rapidly. That seems to have slowed a lot. There's been some new guidances that have been issued for, as I said, they just recently increased the list. So guidances have been increased for those new products. So to help the FDA understand your product, they're going to be looking for some basic information, a description, what's its intended use, the risk benefits, how do you use it, your instructions for use. And because this is supposed to provide more product for people, because they've identified the shortages, they're going to want to know what is the quantity of finished goods that are available and surge capabilities. Now, the surge capabilities have been less of a requirement right now because, and that was really related to the IVDs, but they're still going to want to know about it. So the FDA needs to be able to look at all of this information in some well-organized manner. And so what they've done is they've created templates. And there's a template for each of these different products that they're looking at. You write to the FDA, you request the template, they respond pretty immediately. So the FDA has been busy looking at all of these, but that doesn't mean that's the only thing that they're doing. They are really actively watching fraudulent activities. And I wrote that they've issued 65 warning letters. That number is increasing daily. I literally see 3 to 4 companies identified on a daily basis that are being cited by the FDA and action being taken against them for fraudulent activities. They've had over 260 products already removed. And what they're looking for is companies that are key targets. This product is approved for treatment of COVID. As far as the EUA and the FDA is concerned, there's no authorizations that are out there for treatment. At-home testing, there's no at-home test kits that the FDA has put through. So they're also looking at the companies where they've rescinded the EUA and making sure that they've pulled those products off of the marketplace and are no longer commercializing it. The other thing that's come up pretty recently is that the FDA originally relied upon you to provide testing data, but the FDA is doing their own testing. So the FDA wants to see updated test information on your website, as well as the FDA is now providing test performance data on their website. And recently, as of last week, the FDA is now collaborating with some clinical sites to see the correlation between the test results and what's happening clinically. Lastly, not only are they looking at domestic products, but they are actively at the borders watching what's coming in, what's being imported from overseas, to be sure that they're coming in under EUAs and that it's safe and effective. And I tell you, we are very familiar with a few situations where products, because they hadn't been, the documentation wasn't done right, the FDA put a halt to those products until everything could get worked out. So not only, even if you have an EUA, you've got to make sure your documentation is appropriate to get it through customs. Next slide, please. So the FDA has been really busy. They're working actively with more than 400 test developers. They had been working 24/7. They've now reduced the hours about 2 weeks ago that they now end at about midnight, but they're still extremely responsive and extremely engaged with companies. They're inundated with the requests. They prioritize them based on the urgency. And you have to understand, just because you have a product that falls under the EUA as in short supply doesn't mean that they're going to issue an EUA authorization for everybody. So as of actually this morning, the slide needs to be up. This slide gets updated almost daily. There's now 145 EUA test kits, 122 molecular, 22 antibodies, and 1 antigen. So when this first started in February, all of the tests that had come through under EUA were molecular. Do I have COVID? Don't I have COVID? For the longest period of time, we started to see a trickle in of antibody tests, and the antibody tests are now on a major upswing. The moleculars are slowing down a bit because people want to know, do I have the antibodies? As far as EUAs for lab-based tests, there's been about 25. That's been pretty consistent. About 245 labs are working under this guidance. Ventilators have upped probably in the last month, doubled the number of ventilators authorized. And of course, there's been a number of EUAs issued for personal protective equipment. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go into every single guidance that's out there, but just looking at the ones that seem to be of the highest interest. And so the first one, of course, is the IVD testing. This guidance obviously was the first one that came out in February. The last update was in the middle of May. And under EUA, once you have established your validation for your assay, you can begin to distribute your test while you're preparing your EUA submission. On your website, you've got to have your instruction for use and your test performance data, and that has to be updated. The FDA estimates it should take you 10 business days to submit your EUA application. So you've got 10 days during which you can start to distribute your kit while you're preparing your EUA. Now, the FDA originally, in some of the earlier guidances, had that at 15 days, and they said, nope, 10 days. Get involved with us early, and we'll start looking at it and guiding you. The guidance gives recommendations on what the FDA considers validation testing that they approve or would consider. However, they understand that there's differences in the technology between these different IVD tests, so they're open to discussion if you don't use their validation methods. Next slide, please. So if you've got an assay, you've got it validated, you intend to distribute it, you need to notify the FDA, and they need the basic information of your manufacturer, who's distributing it for you, and a basic summary of the information. And then you prepare your submission. And what the FDA will do is they'll do a preliminary review of your submission. And they're going to look to see if there's any areas that they identify as problematic. And again, they really want to work with companies. So if they think that this problem could be addressed either through labeling or some additional benchtop testing, they're going to work really actively with you and let you know what needs to be revised. If they think it's significant and they don't see that it can be easily addressed, they're going to tell you to stop distributing the test, pull it back, and then they'll work together with you if that's possible. Next slide. So what is the minimum benchtop testing that's required? So the first thing is the limit of detection. So you can spike RNA or an inactivated virus into an artificial or clinical matrix. They want a test dilution series of 3 replicates per concentration to confirm your final concentration with 20 replicates. And your level of detection will be the lowest concentration at which 19 out of 20 replicates are positive. Next slide, please. Minimal clinical evaluation. This is where we've seen a lot of changes in the guidance. Initially, it was all contrived samples. That was fine. It's always been 30 positive and 30 negative, but it was originally contrived. Right now, they want clinical samples. Although the guidance says contrives are possible, they don't want contrived. The feeling from the FDA is that there is enough clinical samples out there. There's no reason to need contrived. And they've actually created a reference panel that you can request samples from the CDC and through the FDA. So there's access to clinical samples out there. The acceptance criteria is 95% agreement at 1 to 2 times the level of detection and 100% agreement at the other concentrations and for negative. For inclusivity, they're looking at all of the published SARS-CoV-2 sequencing, and cross-reactivity, it's the common respiratory flora and viral pathogens. Next slide, please. Face masks. Face mask, I'm sure everybody knows, everybody in the world has to be wearing face masks, and surgical face masks are in very short supply. They're normally, under normal conditions, you use it, you dispose of it, you put on new ones. There aren't enough face masks or surgical masks to go around. So the FDA is trying to expand the availability of face masks, shields, and N95 respirators. The most important thing is the labeling on these. They cannot be labeled as surgical masks because that would be a full submission. So they are strictly face masks, and they need to know what are the components that are coming in contact with the body, your biocompatibility. It also has to be confirmed that your labeling recommends using these in surgical settings where the person might be exposed to hazardous fluids, where there's a very high risk of infection through inhalation, or to make sure they're not being used where flammable gases are. Next slide. But because these face masks are being used over and over and over by people, they can't dispose of it. We're hearing of situations in hospitals where face masks are issued weekly, every other week. The FDA is looking for ways that these masks can be decontaminated. And so they're very open to discussions on that. Again, there's a guidance on it. So you can't just go in and say, look, I decontaminated it, the bioburden's reduced, boom, I'm done. They want a lot more information than that. And the first is, what is your process for your disinfection or decontamination? Tell me about the cycle. What's your concentration? How long? Do you use heat? Do you need humidity? What are the parameters that you have around all of those to reduce the bioburden? They want indicators in each lot. So if you're doing a lot of masks or that you're decontaminating, you've got to have these indicators, be it chemical or biological, depending upon what your cycle is. It's got to be in the center of it. It's got to be on the different margins of it. So they've got to be distributed throughout the lot. Okay, so what do we need to do for bioburden reduction validation? Next slide, please. Here's where there's been the newest change. This is the change that came out in May. So it used to be a strictly, here's the bioburden reduction that we need for all masks, irrespective of whether they're being used or not. The FDA has now come out with a 3-tier system. So tier 1 relates to decontamination of surgical masks or respirators for single or multiple users. And the demonstration for sporicidal or microbactericidal decontamination is either a greater than or equal to 6 log spore reduction of the resistant spores or Mycobacterium species. For tier 2, that's considered decontamination of single users. So you've got to demonstrate viral or vegetative bacterial decontamination with either a greater than 6 log reduction of 3 non-envelope viruses or 2 gram positive and 2 gram negative vegetative bacteria. Next slide. Tier 3, they're looking at bioburden reduction for your N95 respirators. And so you've got to demonstrate a viral or vegetative bacterial bioburden reduction with either a 3+ log reduction for non-enveloped viruses or 2 gram positive, 2 gram negative vegetative bacteria, or evidence of bioburden reduction of greater than 3 log for non-enveloped virus or vegetative bacteria. Next slide, please. That's not all. Now they need to know chain of custody. So if you've got masks that are coming in from a healthcare facility from multiple users, they have to then get from that hospital to your decontamination facility. They've got to go through the decontamination cycle. So you've got to have all of the proof that that's happening with your indicators. They then have to get repackaged and they've got to get returned to the healthcare facility. And if it's for single users, how are you going to track that my mask is coming back to me as opposed to somebody else? So you have to explain your entire chain of custody, and some of it's just by labeling. They also want to look at material compatibility, making sure that your decontamination process isn't going to have deleterious effects on either the mask or the straps. It's also not going to have any residues that may cause injury to the end user of it. Again, what's your risk versus the benefit? And lastly, how many decontamination cycles can each mask go through, and how are you going to keep track of that for each of the masks? Fit. So what the fit test is talking about is when I have repeated decontamination processes, will that affect the fit of my mask or the elastic integrity, especially related to the strap, so that it doesn't fall off in the middle of being used? And what they'll want you to do is in your labeling, identify which surgical masks or respirators are compatible with your specific decontamination process. And you'll have to do adverse event tracking. Next slide, please. So, to summarize, the requirements and guidances are changing. There's more being added, there's changes to it, so you have to stay on top of it. The FDA is really, really willing to work with companies. They're very responsive. The turnaround time is very quick. They want to see you be successful, and they'll try to work with you to show you how they could authorize your products to be there. During this process, they are expecting you to keep track of all of these products. Again, they're not approved or cleared, so you've got to maintain records. How many of these devices were sold? What are the results? What are the adverse events? Keep in mind, the FDA could revise or revoke an EUA, and they have been doing it, and that the EUA is only applicable during this health emergency. So therefore, when the emergency is lifted, you've got to have regulatory clearance for those products to continue to be able to sell them. So thank you. Next slide. I'd like to turn the program over now to Heidi.
Thanks so much, Janice, and thanks everyone for your time today. So Janice gave a great overview of how FDA is interacting with clients for medical devices, and I'm going to talk about how they're working for COVID-19 drug therapies. So next slide. So for the therapeutic side of COVID-19, FDA has actually created the Coronavirus Treatment Acceleration Program, so FDA CTAP. This is a special emergency program that is solely devoted to possible therapies for COVID-19. This program uses every available method to move new treatments to patients as quickly as possible, but of course, always paying attention to the safety of these therapies. The program also supports clinical trials that are testing new treatments for COVID-19, again, to look at safety and effectiveness. And as Janice mentioned, this is an ever-evolving, rapidly evolving program for FDA. So I've listed their website down at the bottom of the slide and encourage anyone who's working on a COVID-19 therapy to look at that fairly frequently. Next slide. So for the CTAP program for drug acceleration, really what they're doing is a massive triage. So when they get a response or a query in for a drug development program, they are responding typically within 1 to 2 days. And the program will make sure that the correct FDA staff receives the query and responds back. And again, it's typically within 1 to 2 days. And what they're promising is a really fast, interactive input for the drug development plan. And because they've gotten flooded with requests, they are prioritizing these product development questions based on the product's scientific merits, where it is in development, and whether it might qualify for a priority product based on US government documents. And we'll get into a little bit of that later. So the other thing they've been doing is within 24 hours giving a review of a clinical protocol for COVID-19 therapy. And they've been able to do reviews for single patient expanded access requests, in this case around the clock and typically within 3 hours of receipt. So again, they're working very, very hard on helping get these potential therapies to patients. They have expedited quality assessments for products for treatments for COVID-19. And they also work to expedite transfer of manufacturing for being able to produce enough for the surges. So as of April 16, which is many weeks ago as far as the pandemic, they had received 950 inquiries and proposals for drug development. And again, because they're just getting flooded, they really triage these based on the scientific merit of the proposals as to which ones get to the front of the line. And as of May 11, they had 144 active trials of therapeutic agents and 457 development programs. Next slide. So if you want to engage with the FDA Coronavirus Treatment Acceleration Program, the first step really is to send preliminary information and questions to this email site listed here. It's a special email listed, special email developed specifically for triaging of COVID-19 therapies. They will respond to this request, and probably most of the time their response back will say to submit a pre-IND meeting request. And again, this is specific for COVID. It will likely go through the FDA's Division of Antiviral Products, which is located in the Office of Infectious Diseases. So the Antiviral Products Division has created a multi-specialty, multidisciplinary review team to help triage all of these requests. And they actually require the meeting request and the pre-IND meeting packet to be submitted at the same time, and they request that those be submitted through either the CDER NextGen portal or the electronic submission gateway. So those are both electronic submissions. They will only respond with a written response. And again, they're going to prioritize which meeting requests, how they're handled based on the completeness of the submission. If you are working on a product that's already approved and you want to repurpose it for COVID-19, or if you have a product that's currently under an IND for a different indication, they actually are suggesting or requiring that you submit a new pre-IND for the COVID-19 use and cross-reference any other communications you've had with the FDA. So they want a new protocol for COVID-19 submitted with this PIND meeting request and packet. Next slide. So some of the things to consider for this pre-IND meeting request and packet, they specifically recommend proposing in your clinical trial that you conduct a randomized placebo-controlled trial with a detailed safety monitoring plan. And because many of these patients are, you know, on ventilators and not doing well, they encourage having an independent drug safety monitoring board as well. And one of the, so to support the use of this therapy in human trials, they do require the following data, so formulation and stability of the product. Any non-clinical studies that have been done in animals, preferably GLP studies with recovery and safety pharmacology testing, and previous human experience. So they're definitely willing to work with sponsors on development programs to expedite treatments that have a compelling safety and efficacy profile for COVID-19, which is why it's saying preferably GLP. So normally it would have to be GLP. So there's some flexibility there for COVID-19 specifically. And they also have flexibility in the, not just the type like GLP, non-GLP, but also the amount of data to support it, again, based on preliminary safety and efficacy information that you're providing to FDA. If you're giving a drug in a new route of administration and they specifically call out inhalation, definitely they want to make sure that you've presented enough non-clinical data to help them evaluate the risk of the product, as well as to support a safe starting dose in humans. Next slide. So for the briefing packet, they've listed quite a number of things that they're expecting to see. They appreciate that not every program will have all of these items. But so they want, for example, a description of the drug substance. And if it's an approved drug, you can just use the current labeling. They need to have a description of the manufacturing scheme, both for the API as well as for the drug product, so any formulation that you have and what you'll be planning to use for the clinical study. They need to have on the CMC side sufficient information to ensure the quality of the product. So you need to show that you can ensure identity, purity, strength, potency. You need to list the dosage form, formulation, and route of administration. Include any known or suspected mechanism of action for the drug. Summary of any available pharmacokinetic information, and any data and literature supporting the use of this drug for specifically COVID-19. And then, of course, a summary of available non-clinical pharmacology and toxicology data, and any clinical information to support the trial. And for that clinical protocol, for the briefing packet, you can include a synopsis, but make sure that it includes the overall design, the patient population with inclusion and exclusion criteria, endpoints, safety assessments, and brief statistical considerations. Next slide. So if your therapy is a cell therapy, gene therapy, a blood product, vaccine, or any kind of complex biological product, it would fall under the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, CBER. And they may have additional pre-IND considerations, and the FDA strongly recommends contacting CBER specifically if your product falls into one of these categories. And there's an email listed on this slide for how to reach out to them. And then they also call out again for inhaled drugs to make sure you include in your pre-IND meeting packet information on the delivery device. and also any inhalation toxicology studies in animals that have been done to support the proposed dose and duration. Next slide. All right, so once you've submitted the request and a packet, the pre-IND meeting will be scheduled. It will be a written response only. Their review and advice for this meeting request will be, again, expedited and prioritized based on the completeness of the submission and the scientific merit. So it will go through a triage system. They will work with the sponsor to ensure that all the necessary information has been submitted. And this is, again, sort of not a typical way that US FDA works with sponsors, but for this specific pandemic therapies, they are definitely willing to work with a sponsor, and in the hopes of that this will expedite the subsequent IND submission. And if you already have an active IND for a drug in development, or you've submitted a pre-IND meeting request for a non-COVID-19 indication, they really do want a new COVID-19 specific pre-IND meeting request. So they request that you go through this process we just talked about, specifically for any therapies for COVID-19. Next slide. So if you are developing an antiviral agent, they specifically call out including cell culture antiviral activity data, such as your EC50 values, and also animal models, which are preferred by US FDA. And if you are working on an antiviral and have some development questions, the FDA recommends reaching out to the National Institutes of Health, and there's additional information about which part of the NIH to reach out to, where they give information on preliminary screening activities that may be available to sponsors of antiviral products. Again, these are activities through the NIH, and US FDA is recommending reaching out to see if that might be a pathway for your development of your antiviral. Next slide. So Janice spent a lot of time talking about emergency use authorizations for medical devices. For drug therapies for COVID, the emergency use authorization is very different. So for drugs to be considered for the EUA, emergency use authorization, they may be effective, so that's some of the flexibility of FDA for the pandemic. They don't have to necessarily be proven to be. They may be effective to prevent, diagnose, or treat COVID-19. But what's important on the drug side of things is that for EUA approval, one of the considerations is the ability to do surge manufacturing for these drugs, and how much actual drug product is available currently, and how much can you manufacture during a surge. So if you are interested in approaching FDA for an EUA for a drug, FDA recommends submitting a pre-IND request and packet, just like we talked about. They consider this to be administratively equivalent to a pre-EUA file. And this will be an opportunity in this pre-IND meeting to get FDA's advice regarding the potential EUA pathway for your product. So in the past few months, FDA has approved only 2 drugs for EUA. Hydroxychloroquine sulfate, the EUA has been retracted as of June. And then the second approval is for remdesivir. And then this is a pie chart from the Milken Institute. This was from the end of May, just showing a snapshot of the types of therapies in development for COVID, end of May, there were 219 treatments being considered and 140 vaccines in development. You can see by that sort of medium blue color, that's the vaccine pie piece. And then, of course, these numbers have only increased over time. So that's the end of the description of how FDA interacts with sponsors for the development of drugs. And we wanted to open up the webinar to allow for any questions on any of the material that we went over today.
Yes, thank you so much, Heidi, and Janice as well. It's a fantastic, fantastic presentation, and I think you can all see this is complex and non-basic stuff. So I really would take this opportunity to ask any questions. You can ask them in the chat box. So I think we've got there's a Q&A box where you can ask. There's actually a chat where you can reach the panelists. So I'll definitely give a few minutes for folks to get in and ask those questions. You can direct them to anybody, I guess, from Heidi and Janice on the FDA, or I mean, this could be even more. Got about 5-10 minutes for even more general questions, even from, let's say, Jim from CSSi or Ben from the Innosphere on what more of their services that they offer. Feel free to ask us some questions about the office. And actually, we go through here because right after this call, we'll definitely send out a follow-up. I think the CSSi folks also have some material to send about the fuller program that they offer. We'll send out a follow-up that includes the, find it here. Yeah, also includes the options for the survey for the future topics. And so let me take a quick look at that, because it's something that you really should check out. I mean, things from further guidance on accelerating your FDA process, going through the QMS, the quality management system, even with the AI and machine learning guidance in the FDA process. These kind of things that are extremely relevant going forward. Even down to the non-regulation side. Ben from Innosphere is going to cover a lot on early financing options, strategy evaluations, you can leverage the capital markets, and even just things around the market in general, market sizing, and getting through some cultural differences. So we will I guess keep an eye out for a note where you can fill out a survey to actually vote on the topics that you want. And we've got one attendee with the hand raised. Josh, you're about to be elevated right here. Let me know if your mic is on. You should be unmuted. And you can type it in if you don't want, but you can also speak. All right, can you hear us at all?
Yeah, Josh, I believe your question is really directed to Janice, where you have submitted you've submitted 3 prior requests to the EUA regarding your PPA manufacture of mask, and you've not gotten a response from the FDA. Janice, would you be so kind as to attempt to address the question?
Yeah, absolutely. Very good question. So we would need to have a little bit more information. We've run into this situation before with some companies. The FDA will only respond to the person who is the designated FDA agent for that company. So it's always useful to have a US-based agent representing you. That's number one. And at that point, also finding out who your project manager is at the FDA, and that's where the communications would come in. So it's hard to give you very specifics to this one, to your very specific question, because I'm not quite sure of exactly who you've corresponded with, where it is in the review process, and if who your assigned project manager is. But as a generality, have the person who submitted try to get in touch with their project manager and see what the status is on it.
Thank you, Janice.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that we're check one spot. I think that's, yep, all the questions that have come through on the chat here. don't know, Jim, if you want to give any quick on how folks can engage kind of in the meantime. I know there's, this is kind of a unique opportunity to get some more personalized question, advice from a really high-end service. So I know you have a paid program where they can participate in, but is there any, in the meantime, right, is there any way they can get some kind of personalized advice to see if what kind of engagement is right for them?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Zan, so much. We do have a dedicated helpline we'll provide you with access to, or you can reach out directly to Janice or to Heidi with your specific questions regarding their email addresses that are provided on their slide presentations. And we'll be happy to respond and happy to assist you and to help you. We've had a lot of experience in working with the FDA in the EUA process. So typically we're able to help provide guidance, very quick and very seamlessly, to you. For more complex questions and discussion, we'd be happy to further engage with you and to determine how we as a company would be able to help and to support you. And you can either reach out directly to one of us through our email addresses, or email us through the US FDA Israeli help desk that we've established for you through the Israeli Trade Mission with Zan.
Perfect. Yeah, it's a great helpline and resource for the companies here for some of these questions that are beyond what our regulation experiences is at the office. But of course, you can also for any additional issues, please reach out to me. Assistance that you're looking for with the company, kind of, including regulation, but beyond that, into funding and other strategic partnerships. Again, working with other players in the healthcare system. Definitely feel free to send me an email. I'll put my email in the box here in case you don't have it. But yeah, look for a follow-up for us, and of course the future webinars in this series. I'm looking forward to a good one. So thanks everybody.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you all for your participation.
Indeed. All right. Thanks everyone. That's it for today. Take care.
Thank you.